Basu and Godin Notebook. 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 Basu and Godin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook. On this Friday, April 26th, I am Martin Godin, alongside Arpin Basu. My friend, how are you today?
Good.
Yeah?
Good. Yeah.
All right. Enjoying playoff hockey?
Enjoying playoff hockey. I am. You're back from Vancouver. You actually took in some real live playoff hockey. Pretty compelling series, that Vancouver-Nashville series. But
you bet.
Surprised that there's so many 3-0 series. That's really... I'm pretty surprised, honestly. Like, the Tampa couldn't get a game out of Florida. Bobrovsky is, not only does he have the same cap hit as Carey Price, but he's really following the same arc as Carey Price, where he's just like this overpriced, somewhat hit or miss goalie in the regular season, and then the playoffs come and boom, he becomes playoff Bobrovsky, as we used to refer to playoff Price, and it's I think that's becoming his MO now, where he just saves his best for the playoffs.
Yeah, that used to be the other way around. When he was in Columbus, they would use him so much during the regular season. He was running out of gas arriving in the playoffs. That tells you how Antoni Stolarz have been useful for this Panthers team, you know? So now Bob is fresh and Bob is good. So, Hey, a bit of news around the NHL that can be somewhat pertaining to the Montreal Canadiens. And it's from Chicago. The Blackhawks signed their young defenseman Alex Vlasic, a second-round pick in 2019, to a six-year extension worth $4.6 million a year. And it's interesting because the kid is, when you look at the numbers, you look at the style of play, is awfully similar to Caden Guhle. So would you say that sort of deal will be used as a comparable for Goalie? And can we expect either the Canadiens to try to extend Goalie this summer? Maybe they might want to wait until next year is passed and that he's actually at the end of his entry level. But do you think that there's somewhat of a connection that can be made between the two players here?
Oh, definitely. I mean, they're very similar in style, in usage, in age. Though Goalie was drafted a year after Vlasic, he's only 6 or 7 months younger than him. Lot of tough minutes, playing against top competition. I think Vlasic's sort of defensive metrics give him a bit of an edge. Goalie's had a bit more of an offensive impact than Vlasic has, so it really, it's definitely going to be used as a comparable. Now, is Goalie going to sign a similar contract? I doubt it. I think he's going to get more. I think the Canadiens might be interested in giving him more term, which will cost them more money. Goalie right now is 23, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 22, sorry. And so when his contract expires, he'll be 23. And so if that's basically, if you sign him to an 8-year extension, you're basically buying 4 years of unrestricted free agency. Each of those years will be costly. And so it's, Vlasic's, the 6-year term, only buys, I guess, 2 years in his case of unrestricted free agency. But it definitely creates a market for what Goule's going to get. What's interesting is that if the Canadiens decide to wait, they could extend him as of July 1st. Same with Slafkovsky, obviously, which I think is what's top of mind for most fans. And the similarity in both cases is the advantage for the Canadiens to act now is that they avoid a big time breakout season on both their parts from driving their price up, which is
why the player would rather wait. No,
Well, that's it. And I think in Slavkovsky's case, it would make sense to wait, and
Yeah,
really, whereas in Guhle's case, one of the question marks is health, right? That he could stay healthy and stay on the ice, basically. And, when you asked him after the season if he wants to change anything in his preparation or and he mentioned he wanted to add muscle and it's been a few times that he's been rocked by hits. The one from Kucherov wasn't even all that devastating a hit, and it winds up knocking him out for the rest of the season with a concussion. So yeah, he's had injury issues over his short career. So, if he were to play a full healthy season next year, produced offensively a bit more, it could drive his price up. What if he gets hurt again? It could drive his price down. So I think Guhle is more incentivized to lock into something long term, and the Canadiens would have to decide if the risk is worth it, which I think they would. And so if you get him on a 7 or 8 year, I was kind of guessing for him, like based, kind of piggybacking off the Vlasic deal. Like if they were to go 7 years with Guhle, they could probably get it at roughly $6 million a year, something like that. Yeah. 8 years would be a bit higher of an AAV just because you're buying an extra UFA year. But I don't know. I feel like that's kind of that seems fair to me to sign Guhle for 7 years, $42 million, would give him obviously the payday that sets him up for life. And for the Canadiens, I think it's a mitigated, calculated risk that he will be able to stay healthy. But whenever he's been healthy, he's shown that he would be worth that kind of money and then some. And that's a contract that could eventually become almost a bargain with the cap rising and the percentage of the cap dwindling on that number as the contract goes on. So that seems to me to be a bit of a sweet spot for him. Yeah. And the Vlasic deal kind of helps establish that, because I think if he had signed for 7 or 8 years, that AAV would have been higher.
Well, there's the health aspect. There's also the offensive upside, I think, that might be a factor somewhere. You look at Alex Vlasic when he was at Boston University, he never put up points. He's always been this towering defensive stalwart and a guy that's extremely dependable, but not necessarily the guy who's going to produce offense for you. Whereas in juniors, Guhle was able to put up some numbers, whether it was in Prince Albert or in Edmonton. And he might not be put in the situations in Montreal, be it power play or else, where he would see a ton of offensive opportunities. But I think that there is room to grow offensively and be able to put up more points than what he has so far in his career. So I think that if you are able to sign him anywhere below 6 is interesting, but it also, in my mind, it sort of caps his value somewhere, because if he doesn't put up any points, well, however amazingly good he can become defensively, it's still a high price ticket for a defenseman of that kind. So, plus, you on the one hand, you want to be able to bank on the fact that you sign him long term, but you're going to have to pay you're going to pay for UFA years that Guhle renounces to. But at the same time, the longer the contract, the bigger the risk for a guy who's been having some health issues. And I take, for example, a guy like Brett Pesce in Carolina. Obviously, he didn't have the same pedigree at first because he was a 3rd round pick. He was not like a top 15 pick like Guhle was. But coming out of his entry level deal, he signed a 6-year deal at shortly, a little bit north of $4 million a year. And there's
basically
a chance,
the same deal as Vlasic.
Yeah. And there's a chance that they could be, again, a bit of similar players, So waiting that extra year, I understand when your argument of saying, well, it's a sweet spot if they try to make that move now, but maybe that waiting one extra year would help the Canadiens getting even a better sense of the trajectory of the player. I think they have already a pretty good idea and they're comfortable with it. but maybe that the next season could help them be reassured in part with the health thing. And I'm not sure if anyway he would be in a position where he would put up so many more points that all of a sudden the price would go up a great deal. So
I don't know about that.
No?
I don't know about that. Well, I think.
Do you think that next year Guhle could come and play and
it could
hit 40
just happen
points?
It could just happen organically. Like, I don't think, like, if the Canadiens improve up front the way they clearly communicated that they intend to do, obviously Dach coming back is a big factor in that, and whoever they add, which we're going to get to in a second here. But I mean, it's if they improve up front and just score more goals as a team, Guhle's naturally going to produce more points. I mean, I think it would just be, a lot of people would produce more points if that's the case. So it's not as if he's going to suddenly start getting power play minutes or whatever, but he'd be playing. He was pretty much married. Like, when he was playing with Matston, like, you're getting the minutes you get with that top line lend itself to point creation. If they could build a second line around Dach that can be also productive, then you're giving another opportunity to that whichever defense pairing he's on. So yeah, I think Guhle himself will improve. It's not like he's reached his ceiling yet. And then the overall improvement of the team, I think could lead to a bump in offensive production that would drive the price up a little bit. I mean, listen, there's risks for both sides in going right now. But unlike Slavkovsky, who I think can reasonably enter next season and say, well, if I play all season the way I did the last half of this season, I'm looking at a really big number. I'm going to be the highest paid player on the team, basically. And I don't know if Guhle can have the same assurance going into next season, but I think there's reason for Guhle to lock in long term. And there's reason for the Canadiens to try and get what might turn out to be a bit of a discount by making the commitment now as opposed to next season. So they could, it could go back in their face if Guhle again has a serious injury next year, but I think that's a risk that the Canadiens have already decided they're going to take, whether it's this year or next year. They're committed to this kid. It's quite clear. It's not going to change.
For sure. He's so, he's so reliable. The fact that he's been able to play those tough minutes ever since he entered the NHL, that's quite impressive, and he's a very low maintenance guy also for them. Hard worker. He's got leadership qualities. He's got a lot of intangibles going for him that might not show on the score sheet, but that would definitely influence his overall value and the perception that the team has of that player. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know when this is going to get done, but I think it's relevant. Alex Vlasic's probably the first contract that is signed that really gives us a measuring stick and a ballpark as to, okay, if this is a base, where do they take it from there? If they if they choose to inspire themselves at least a little bit from the Alex Vlasic deal.
And I would just add a little tidbit. So that day when I tweeted out that the Vlasic contract could be relevant to Caden Guhle, first off, a lot of people took that to mean like, oh, this is what Guhle's going to sign for. And, Guhle's obviously, he's going to make more than that. And I got a whole bunch of replies. And I was like, no, it's relevant. It doesn't mean that it's look up the word relevant. And it just provides a basis of comparison. But so, colleague Dom Lasician at the Athletic kind of reached out to me after that. He's like, where do you think Guhle would go? And I gave him the 7 times $6 million figure that I kind of thought. And so his model, over 7 years from next season, from 24-25, which actually this thing would kick in 25-26. No, his contract would kick in 25-26. But anyhow, going for 24-25 for 7 years, his model puts him at a projected value of $6.3 million per year. So there
you go.
Yeah, just
you and Dom's model seem to be seeing eye to eye. That's good.
Yes, actually, I think the projected value might be even higher because if it starts in 25-26 instead of 24-25, you're getting more of the expensive years of Guhle. So I think the projected value would actually be higher.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to the crux of this episode. So we had said, after your dozens and dozens and dozens of questions on this topic, what is the next Newhook Dach-like trade, which I think the Canadians should trademark at this point. We said we'd do a whole episode on it. So, yes, we've just spent 15 minutes talking about the Guhle contract, but that's the crux of this episode. This is the day. Today's the day that we're going to talk for a long time about the next Dach Newhook style deal. So happy Dach Newhook like deal day to everyone. So let's start with the basic criteria. If we're going strictly by the literal Dach and Newhook trades, what they had in common, they were both players coming out of entry-level contracts. They were both first-round picks. They both had somewhat, to varying degrees, underperformed over the life of their entry-level contract. And the difference is that one of them was on a rebuilding team that, for whatever reason, decided this guy was not going to be part of the rebuild, which I think we'll see one of our candidates that fits for him. And the other one was on a contending team that was very tight under the cap and had some other priorities money-wise, and decided they could not fit a raise for Newhook under their cap. So now that we have that out of the way, so those are the opening parameters. We're going to look at some more things like that that don't fit those parameters. But when you look at strictly players who are coming off entry-level contracts, there are a few names that come to mind, but the one that I was alluding to on a rebuilding team, the first one is Kent Johnson of the Columbus Blue Jackets, who had some injury issues and had some trouble. It was bouncing in and out of the lineup, and there were a lot of head scratching going on around the league of how the Blue Jackets were treating Kent Johnson. So what do you think about Kent Johnson as a target for a Dach Newhook-like trade?
The first time we were asked that question was at the very beginning of the season. I think we were still in training camp. No, actually, the season had just started, and I answered that question, and the answer to that question, what is the next Dach Newhook deal? And I said, I think Kent Johnson is my guy. So since then, there were, at the beginning of the season, there were questions about his pace coming from Pascal Vincent, and there's nothing really later on in his usage over the course of the season that suggests that he took any significant stride to solve the issues that bothered his head coach, because he very rarely played over 15 minutes a night. He was sheltered. He was, and honestly, it was such a down year, even from a statistical standpoint. I mean, the kid in his rookie season scored 40 points, which is quite impressive. It was his first full season, should I say, 40 points in 79 games, and this time he had only 16 points in 42 games. So that includes a stint in the minors. Those 42 games is because he had a stint in the minors, during which, I mean, he was very productive with the Cleveland Monsters. But also, he had a season-ending labral tear that he suffered on February 28th. Yeah. So this is a guy, I'm a bit puzzled by the way things are going in Columbus. And I'm not sure exactly where they stand on Kent Johnson in particular, because they're being very harsh, it seems, on everybody, on veterans, on kids, and well,
the David Jiricek situation over there has not gone smoothly. Let's put it that way.
Not at all. But I mean, there's a lot. No matter the age, there is a lot of disgruntled players on that team, and I think that they're trying to establish a culture and a way of playing that's going to be very specific. But you mentioned Jiricek has not been happy. Obviously, Johnny Gaudreau has not been happy. Jack Roslovich was not happy. Eventually, he left the organization. Laine, it hasn't been good either. I mean, it adds up, right? So I think that Kent Johnson doesn't seem like one of those disgruntled guys. He seems to be a rather low maintenance guy for them, and probably that they need that. So even though I said that I thought that he could be a candidate for the Canadiens to be traded for, I'd be surprised if the Columbus Blue Jackets gave up on the kid now.
Yeah,
because really, what's the incentive? The Canadiens have what they have mainly to offer is young defensemen and draft picks. In the situation that they're in, I don't think that the Columbus Blue Jackets will give up on a 21-year-old kid in order to get some more draft picks. It doesn't make any sense for them. They already have 5 guys under contract on defense for next year. They have to re-sign Jake Bean. And you look also in the pipeline, while Jiricek is still waiting for his turn. Corson Kulemans has turned pro. And, Denton Matichuk is a first-round pick. He was still in juniors this year, but there's a lot of guys there. So I don't think that there's...
Stanislav Svozil also is in Cleveland.
Also, yeah. Right. So ultimately, I don't see that there's a fit there between Montreal and Columbus for Johnson.
Yeah, I would agree with that because of that they don't need young defensemen. They have a bunch, really good ones. The draft pick thing, though, they don't have a lot of draft picks. Like, this is not the Arizona Coyotes, and for a team that's although I don't think they're not first. Well, problem number one is they don't have a general manager yet, so that's whoever they hire is going to have to make a decision on what direction this team is going. But obviously, I don't think the appetite is all that big in Columbus to go into full-on rebuild mode. And even if they were to go into full-on rebuild mode, you would think that any reasonable general manager would think that Kent Johnson is part of that process. But they don't have a ton of picks. Like this year, they have their first-round pick, which is just ahead of the Canadiens in terms of lottery odds. They don't have a second-round pick. They have 2 picks in the third and 1 in the fourth, 1 in the fifth, 1 in the sixth, which is kind of irrelevant. Next season, they have their own first-round pick, 1 second-round pick, which I think is tied to a trade of some sort. Yeah, it is. It is possibly going to Philadelphia in a Provorov deal. And ultimately, they have 1 third-round pick. Like, they don't have an excess of high draft picks. So that maybe is something that could entice them. But I agree with you in the sense that with their, that's a really attractive GM job. Other than the fact that Columbus has just perpetually been a non-factor in the NHL, but you have a really high-end forward signed to Johnny Gaudreau. Like, Boone Jenner is a good player. He's got 2 more years at a very reasonable contract. Obviously,
plenty of great young forwards.
Well, that's Fantilli,
Sillinger.
Johnson, Sillinger, like Chinnikov, I think is looking good. God, Alex Nylander went off after that trade. It's funny that trade had a condition on what Bemstrom would score, a really specific goal total that he had to get to in Pittsburgh in order to improve the draft pick that they got. But it was Nylander who went on a scoring tear with Columbus. And as we just mentioned, the defense. Like the Canadiens don't have a whole lot other than draft picks that would entice them in a Kent Johnson deal. But frankly, draft picks is what got them Kirby Dach. So, if they could.
And Newhook too.
And Newhook too. But I mean, it was getting creative with Dach and going out and acquiring a high first round pick or a real relative mid round pick, I guess, allowed that deal to happen. But I doubt the conditions are the same here with Kent Johnson, but he is. That
being said, he's a good candidate from the Montreal Canadiens' point of view. I think that he could legitimately be a target for them because he's got top 6 upside, written all over. He's got a lot of versatility because he can play both wings and he can play center. He's rather small. I mean, he's 6 foot. His latest listing has him at 178 pounds, up from the previous listing that was at 167. But he still needs to bulk up and make sure that he's ready to play against men. but he's a very crafty guy. He's a good playmaker, very shifty with the puck too. But again, it's if they have their mind on saying we got to play fast, and they don't like maybe that he slows down the play and that he doesn't play with enough pace. It might be a case where at some point, well, there's another thing though. You mentioned that they're looking for a GM. The GM might decide to change coach. Yeah. And the GM might say, well, you know what? Our identity is going to take this other direction based on who we have. So instead of saying, well, this is a head coach that's going to ask to play a certain way, maybe that there's something new criteria will come into play with a new GM at the helm. So if that's the case, maybe that they start perceiving Kent Johnson differently. But for Montreal, I mean, if I get him and I think of him as a second line winger, I think there would be great opportunities there. But again, are the Blue Jackets willing to sacrifice him in order to get more draft picks? If that's the case, great. I think this is a team that needs a lot of character guys. Because they've got a lot of raw talent in Columbus, but it's been chaos over there. The culture has been ugly for years. They need to be a team. They need to be a lot more cohesive than they've been. It's been going in all directions. So maybe that if they try to make moves, I would imagine that they'll try to bring in guys that will help steer the ship in the right direction from that point of view.
Well, and I guess we'll just close on Kent Johnson on this. And you just reminded me of Pierre Torion. They need to be a team. Like I think what we have is a team. Very infamous quote from Pierre Dorion. But the one problem they have, and I don't know if the Canadiens are really in a position to solve it, but the problem they have is in goal. Elvis Merzlikins' contract is a problem. He's got 3 years left at $5.4 million a year. If there's some way, he also has a modified no trade clause on that contract. He's a 10-team no trade list. Don't know if Montreal is on it or not. But, if there's any way for the Canadiens to help solve that, and I know that last season they did try. I heard at one point that they did try to kind of, when back early in the season when they were, when Edmonton was looking for a goaltender and there were rumors of Jake Allen, I had heard that the Canadiens had tried to get Jack Campbell involved in that deal to provide some sweeteners or to extract some sweeteners from Edmonton. I mean, Kent Johnson would be one hell of a sweetener. Let's not undermine that, but I don't know if there's a way for them to help them solve their Merzlikins situation, but if there is, and they're willing to eat a lot of cap room to have him playing in Laval or even in Montreal, who knows? Maybe it could resurrect his career.
I don't think it'd be a good idea because Campbell is already in the AHL and he's been in the AHL. Heck, he's been in the ECHL previously in his career. So right now he's an AHL level goalie. And we both know that the Canadiens at some point, almost a year ago, almost to the day, they poked around because they thought maybe that Cal Peterson could be an option for them in Laval and figuring out a way to extract him out of LA because he was in the American League. Merzlikins, even though he hasn't been a good goalie, he views himself as a number one goalie in the NHL. If you acquire him to stash him with the Laval Rocket, that's going to be one disgruntled goalie. And I'm not sure if you acquire another asset, but Merzlikins becomes your problem. And if you decide to make him your backup in Montreal and you try to move, let's say, Primo, I mean, it's a lot of complications for nothing, man.
Yeah. No, I think I'm just saying that that's an avenue to get Kent Johnson. Like that's actually the most realistic avenue, I think, is if that's somehow what they came up with, And I agree with you. It's not worth it. And having him in Laval would potentially be, I mean, listen, it's possible that he'd be like, whatever, I'm getting paid. I don't care. This is pretty good. And this is fine. Like it's as much as he might think he's a number one goalie, he hasn't played like one for 2 years now. So it's really, but anyhow, that's just another factor that Columbus has that maybe, and since the Canadiens have looked into both Peterson and Campbell, he's right in that same kind of price range. Maybe that's another way that they could go about it. Okay.
But hold on a second. Let's make because I know we decided that we would do an episode on Dach and Newhook type of trades, but let's throw in there different kinds of trades for a second. And if we stay in Columbus for a minute, how about Patrik Laine? Is he absolutely you can't touch him, or
no? There's
an option there to have him not on the cheap because he's a high priced salary, but to have him at a discount in terms of assets you give up.
Yeah, well, I think he's a player that you could add for draft picks. Draft picks, or I mean, as not great as the Canadiens' forward prospects are, I think one of them could be used in a potential Laine deal. Just to kind of summarize, first of all, he's in the NHL, NHLPA player assistance program right now. I don't think it's been announced that he's out of that program yet. And wish him all the best in his work there. 2 more years at $8.7 million a year. Both Laine and the Blue Jackets probably would appreciate a fresh start. I think the Blue Jackets would love to get most of that contract off the books. So if they were to trade him, also has a modified no trade clause, by the way, 10-team no trade list. If they were to trade him, I don't think it would, if you threw in, let's say the Canadiens have Colorado's second round pick. They could do that. Maybe a prospect of some sort. Get Columbus to hang on to maybe $2 million of that 8.7 or $2.5 million. Yeah, I could see that, but that is completely separate category of trades. But I could see that as it's a kind of a, yes, there's some risk to it, but it's a 2-year risk, and it's really, it's not a huge term risk, and the potential upside is quite high. And so the Canadiens would have to hope that their environment, their development environment, everything they're doing with their young players, they could do that with Laine, because obviously the toolkit is exactly what the Canadiens need. A large winger, booming shot, someone who you could pair him with Kirby Dach. Man, could you imagine a Slav Dach Laine line?
My God.
That would be a really big offensive line. But anyhow, a lot of options on how you can use them would help the power play, assuming he can get back to where he was before. And you have to, and you would have to hope, obviously, that the work he's doing right now could get his personal life on track. That would maybe pay dividends on the ice. But I think that's a situation where I think both player and club would look for a new start, look for a fresh start. So yeah, I would take that risk, but there's a lot of conditions here. The Canadiens, the price can't be very high. They would need Columbus to retain some money, ideally $3 million or so of the 8.7 to get it down to 5.7. Yeah,
5.7 for 2 years. I take the chance any day on the guy with the talent.
Yeah,
with all his defensive inefficiency, let's say, his engagement level defensively is, it's passable. It's passable. It's not very good.
Yeah. So, but no, you have to hope. You have to hope that what Marty St. Louis has been able to do with Cole Caulfield, he could get Patrik Laine to buy in. I mean, that's a lot of what the Canadiens are going to do, player acquisition wise, are going to be based on what Martin St. Louis is able to do, what Adam Nicholas and Scott Pellerin are able to do. Just their whole ecosystem having positive impacts on these players. They've already seen it have a positive impact with Dach last season, Newhook this season, but there's other cases where it hasn't. Josh Anderson obviously being Exhibit A of that. So I think it would be a decent calculated risk to do that. Okay, so now going back to the Dach Newhook like deal, there are two other players who kind of fit more of the Newhook angle, where they play on some cap strap teams. Entry level deals are coming off, and there could be some money issues. The two of them are Dylan Holloway, who I think we brought up before, and Anton Lindell of the Florida Panthers. Now, I don't know to what extent there's an appetite in Florida to not have Lindell back.
But I think they'd love to have him back.
Yeah. But there are realities in Florida that are kind of coming to a head. So they have Brandon Montour and Sam Reinhart are both unrestricted free agents this season. They re-signed Gustav Forsling, so they avoided that, and they signed him to a pretty sweetheart deal. And the thing you got to remember about Florida is you can get these deals under market value because of the no state tax. So I'm pretty sure Gustav Forsling would not sign at $5.75 million a year if you were playing in Montreal, for instance, or Toronto or Los Angeles or what have you. So you have Montour, you have Reinhart. Next year you have Bennett and Verhaeghe that need to be signed. You have, a number of different, Oliver Ekman-Larsson's a free agent. Kulikov's not that big of a deal. But really those two big UFAs are probably going to eat up a good chunk of their available cap space. Now, they could obviously make some room otherwise. And Lundell's coming off, a bit of a down year. His most productive season was as a rookie, and he hasn't really matched that since. My reservation on Lundell is that he doesn't 100% fit what the Canadiens are looking for. Like when they're looking at offensive talent, like Lundell to me is a very good two-way, responsible forward. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, actually, it's actually great for him, but it's not. I don't know if it fits exactly what the Canadiens are looking for, but he has played wing, can obviously play center. It would not be cheap. That would be a costly transaction, but because of their financial situation and because they don't have a first round pick, they don't have a second round pick this year, they don't have a fourth round pick, they don't have a first round pick next year, they don't have a third round pick next year. So draft capital would be pretty interesting to them. So it's a possibility.
The thing with the Dach and Newhook type of trades is that since it's guys that are at the end of their entry level, it forces the team who has those guys to evaluate what do we do with them and how much are we willing to commit with those guys at the point that they're at. And if we sign them to a bridge deal, it's one thing. Are we ready to commit long-term with those guys? It's another thing. And where I think that there's a comparison to be made between Lindell and, let's say, Newhook, is the fact that both of their original teams, the team that drafted them, are Stanley Cup contenders. And for them, it's really in the now mode. Lindell, I think, is a very valuable player to the Panthers. He's highly defensively savvy. And I think that this is something that's not lost on Paul Maurice. Since Paul Maurice took over in Florida, the Panthers, did a 180-degree shift to defensive hockey. And Lindell is fitting very well in there. As far as offensive upside, though, as long as Sam Bennett is there, and right now he's injured, right? In the playoffs, in Game 2, he got a puck on the hand, and he's out for the next little while. So Lindell has been elevated as second-line center. Maybe he's going to have a different type of opportunity. But in the regular season, he was not necessarily put in a lot of offensive situations. And I think that if he was to be moved in Montreal, he would definitely have more of those offensive situations. Would it be at center? Would it be on the wing? I don't know. But I think that the fact that he's got this 200-foot game so early in his career makes him attractive no matter where he plays. I think that something that's very much valued in Montreal is the versatility of being able to play both center and wing. Dach and Newhook, two prime examples of that. The issue, I think, with Lindell, and the only reason why he makes that list is because of the cap constraints that the Panthers have. If they had no issue whatsoever, they would just continue, sign him, and be done with it.
They probably will. They'll probably find a will. We should say they probably will do that. They probably will find a way to sign him somehow, but they're gonna have to get creative and move some money in order to do it. Probably.
It's just that if we're the Montreal Canadiens, it's worth placing a call to see if something can be done. But from the Canadiens' perspective, yes, they want to add offense. I think that they want to add a bit of physicality to toughness to their lineup, and that's definitely not the forte of Anton Lindell. He's not a physical guy at all. So he's got a lot going for him, but physicality is not that. So I think that he remains an interesting candidate. And this is a team that could use cheap defensemen to replace the Ekman-Larssons and the Kulikov and whatnot. They could use cheap defensemen. They could use more draft picks too. So in that sense, there's a fit with what the Canadiens have to offer. Now, is he really available? I doubt it. I doubt it. But but it's someone that's going to be that it's worth keeping track on for the rest of the playoff and see how does he fare in that environment and how do they use him, especially while Bennett is out.
Yeah. So another player who fits that very similar criteria in a very similar situation is Dylan Holloway, who we have spoken about many times. And, I'm not sure what his ceiling is or his upside is, but it's like, is he really a top six guy? He doesn't have that opportunity in Edmonton, which is kind of similar to Newhook in that sense. Is a guy who is just kind of stuck further down the lineup because of the overwhelming amount of talent at the top of the lineup. Has had injury issues. Would probably, the thing with him is, yes, Edmonton is cap strapped, but I think getting Dylan Holloway to sign a second contract would not prove costly. He hasn't really done anything to merit or to have any sort of bargaining power when it comes to his next contract. So signing a cheaper bridge is probably in the cards. It wouldn't be all that difficult. But if the Oilers wanted to move on from him, or if they also wanted to add some draft capital or what have you, something to sort of replenish their cupboard. And they're also a team that could use cheap defensemen. But they do not have a first round pick this year. They have their own second. They have no pick in the third round, no pick in the fourth round. Next year, they do not have a second round pick. So it's similar to the Panthers. And, obviously the price on Holloway would not be anywhere near what it would cost to pry Lindell out of Florida. But yeah, it's a very similar circumstance to Newhook, where a first round pick drafted more or less the same place Newhook was, hasn't really been able to get an opportunity higher up the lineup, and maybe would get that in Montreal. But I have my doubts about what his actual upside is. Yeah.
Maybe he's only a third line guy. Who knows? But I like his grit. I like the fact that he's a combative player, and he might not have the skill of a second line player, but he might have the will of a second line player, and that might be enough to get him there someday. Yeah. For the time being, I mean, if we project ourselves to the beginning of next year, he's going to be on their top 9 next year to start the season. He's slotted as their third line winger, third left winger behind RNH and Evander Kane, at least to start the season. But what I'm interested in is, the Oilers at the deadline, they went to acquire Troy Stetcher as a 7th defenseman because they had 6 Ds at the NHL level, and their 7th D was in the American League, former first-round pick Philip Broberg, who they've been grooming in the American League. But if there was any injury or anything, he was their first call-up, and clearly They were not comfortable in having him ready for the show in the playoffs right away, so they went to get Stetcher as a seventh defenseman. Now, Stetcher is on an expiring contract. Vincent Desharnais on an expiring contract. So they don't have many bodies, NHL bodies on defense for next year. But since Knobloch took over as head coach in November, the Oilers have been 8th in the National League in goals against. They've been 11th in expected goals against, which is very good. And they've been 11th also in high danger chances against. So that's since November 13th, since the change of coaches. So I guess management will have to say, do we have an issue on defense? Do we need to add some guys on defense, or our structure is sound enough from the results that we were able to get from a Chris Knobloch coach team that we can just keep going with the guys that we have, add some complementary parts on the blue line and be done with it. But again, what the Canadians have to offer is young defensemen and draft picks. And for them, going after draft picks makes no sense because, again, they're in a win now mode. A year from now, they'll start thinking about re-signing Leon Draisaitl. So if they're in a position where they can re-sign Dylan Holloway on the cheap because he hasn't been so productive during his entry level, well, it's great because they got a top 9 winger for them that's there at a very affordable deal. Maybe it's not such a bad thing for them. So it really depends on the evaluation that the Oilers will make of their defense group and how much they think that it really needs improvement or not before they start considering of moving one of their forwards, and especially a guy from like Holloway, in order to shore up their defense or not.
Agreed. Yeah. So it's really, I don't think he's like an ideal candidate just because it's, but you know, he would be a young talent that he would fit that. I think of the forwards that we've all mentioned, he's the guy who kind of fits what those guys represented, what Dach and Newhook sort of represented to their teams as guys. You know, you're not quite sure if he's ever going to reach the potential of where he was drafted, and the Canadians try and unlock that at a discount, basically in a trade. But I agree that Holloway's ability, or the Oilers' ability to sign Holloway at a reasonable number, very reasonable at a cheap number, frankly, would make him more attractive to Edmonton than whatever the Canadians can offer. Though I would say, you know, if the Canadians are going to trade Jordan Harris somewhere, I could see Edmonton being a place where they would appreciate a guy like that. Like it's you know, you look at how Kulak has kind of seamlessly fit in Edmonton. What did we always say about Kulak? What's his dimension? But he had good feet. He facilitates transition without being necessarily an elite puck mover. In Montreal, wasn't really on either special
top
teams.
40.
Yeah, that top 40 exactly. And so I don't think Harris is either. But you know, he is. You know, he would be a guy that that doesn't necessarily would be useful in Edmonton, and so I don't know. It's I don't know if it's worth it for Montreal, but I could see Edmonton saying like, okay, like if we want a cheap, useful forward, or we can get this cheap, useful defenseman who is really starting to show his chops, and you know, the Oilers have seen a fair bit of Jordan Harris. Brad Holland, the assistant GM of the Oilers, was in Montreal a lot this season, was also in Laval a few times. I don't know what was going on there. I do think for a while they were looking at Jake Allen, but I think at one point that had stopped and he was still coming. He was there very late in the season, which I found weird, but he was there. I think there might be a reason why he's coming that we don't know about, but he's seen a lot of the Canadians' young defensemen, so he's very familiar with what they have. But yeah, we'll see if that makes sense.
Jaden Struble too, you know,
Jaden Struble, a lot of guys, like a lot of guys that they would have had a look at.
But
So
Arpin, so far, I mean, we've looked at three guys that are logical candidates, but each of them ultimately it leans more on the side of, nah, we don't think that's going to happen. So it goes to show how difficult when you look at the criteria, how when management says, oh, it's difficult to make trades. When you look at what the Canadians, if the Canadians wanted to repeat that same format or that same MO for a Dach Newhook trade, finding those candidates, finding good fits, and a reasonable reason for the other team to make that trade can be difficult, because that's three guys that are logically interesting to the Canadians, but in the end, that might just stay put.
no, absolutely, and so that's that's kind of the deal. But I think I think that applied to Dach, maybe less so Newhook, but it did. I think Dach, they needed to be enticed to part ways with them. Our understanding was that the Blackhawks had another offer on the table for a similarly high draft pick. That's why the Canadians had to add, I think it was a third round pick or something, to sort of sweeten their offer. But the Blackhawks, if they didn't get what they wanted, could have easily just looked at that and been like, we're just going to wait. Like this, or we're just going to keep him and we'll just sign him ourselves and he'll be part of our rebuild. So there's always an element of that in these deals where it's kind of the impetus is on the Canadians or any other team inquiring about these players to make it worth their while. But the fact that both Florida and Edmonton are in a contending window like Colorado was, that they have money issues like Colorado did, makes that argument easier than it does in the Kent Johnson case, which is kind of more similar to Dach, where Columbus can very easily look at Kent Johnson and say, this is a player that we're going to go forward with. This is a player we're going to win with. We don't need what you're offering. And so yeah, it is difficult. But that difficulty, having said that, for that difficulty, just because they've done the Dach Newhook trade 2 years in a row doesn't mean that that's necessarily the avenue they're going to take. And if you expand the parameters, and we already talked about Patrik Laine, which is a case where it's not a Dach Newhook deal at all. The obvious one is Trevor Zegras.
Oh yeah, you really expand the criteria there.
Well, that's Trevor Zegras is obviously would be a great target for the Canadians. There's no doubt about that. That's not breaking news, and there's no reason for anyone listening or watching this to fall off their chair hearing that. But how does that fit with Anaheim? How would that fit with Anaheim work, in your opinion, if ever they were to make Zegras available, which is not 100% guaranteed? And how would the Canadians convince them that it's worth their while to trade Trevor Zegras right now?
Yeah. So I see two things. First off, you say if Zegras is made available, he's got to be on the market first things first. Right now, the Ducks have a ton of cap room. They're a rebuilding team. They're young. They're looking for offense. You put all those items together and you're thinking, well, considering all that, why would they trade Trevor Zegras? So it's either that there are warts in his game that suggest that they encourage them to move on from him, or B, they really want to flip him for things that are essential to them. And Pat Verbeek was pretty clear the other day to the effect that he's looking for right wingers and right shot defensemen.
Yeah,
he wants
right shot top six forwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right shot forwards, right shot D. That's what he's looking for. The Canadians have a few of those.
Yeah.
I think that up front, interesting right shot forwards that might be available in the trade. There might not be that many. Josh Anderson is a sort of guy that could be compelling to Pat Verbeek, because Pat Verbeek likes his guys likes guys who get their nose dirty the same way that he did when he was a player. I think that he's alone in some category of goals scored plus penalty minutes. Like he's in the league of his own.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Him and Gerard Gallant.
There you go.
From that era, those were the two guys who kind of did that. I mean, Josh Anderson, obviously the version of Josh Anderson we saw this year wouldn't, but I think that there's enough of a track record for Josh Anderson where a GM like Pat Verbeek maybe could be convinced that they could get the best out of him, and supply some of the grit that they're looking for, even though he didn't play a particularly gritty game this year at all.
No.
But yeah,
the real crux, the real issue is on defense. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you cannot throw Justin Barron in there. He's not worth, enough for that. So it really boils down to, are the Montreal Canadiens willing to give up one of Mailloux or Reinbacher in order to acquire Trevor Zegras?
That is what it comes down to.
That's the issue. That's the whole thing.
That's the whole thing. And so, I think they're two different cases, right? I think in Reinbacher's case, you probably don't have to add a whole lot, if anything. That's sort of the basis of a 1-for-1 kind of deal. Based on the draft pedigree and everything else, and how recently he was drafted. The Canadiens could probably make that deal with not a whole lot added on either side. Maybe there'd be a draft pick here or a draft pick there from one side or the other, but that would be the basic elements of the deal. Whether the Canadiens are willing to do that, I'm not. Actually, I would doubt they would be. I think a lot of fans probably would be, but it's the Canadiens, and it should be noted, not just the Canadiens. There were a lot of teams that looked to David Reinbacher last year and saw potential of a top pairing D. The Canadiens obviously saw that potential. His season did nothing to boost that, but I don't think, until he plays a full year in North America, and frankly, the 11 games he played in Laval were quite encouraging. He was really good, and showed that the North American game not only will not hinder him, but actually in some ways really enhances some of his best qualities: his gap control, his ability to kill plays, his instinctive attacking of puck carriers. All of that gets enhanced in a tighter environment, and so yeah, I don't know the extent to which the Canadiens would entertain that, but if I'm the Anaheim Ducks, that's who I'm asking for. I mean, they're sending out a very talented offensive player, kind of a foundational piece, if you will. So that might be the end of the conversation. Frankly, if the conversation gets to that, and the Ducks are like, it would take David Reinbacher, and that's all we're interested in, then maybe that ends it right there. Mailloux, the Canadiens would likely have to add a piece or two to make that deal work. And if they were to add Josh Anderson into that deal, they might have to add another piece to just kind of compensate the Ducks for taking on that contract. But if you take Anderson,
so you see Anderson as having negative value.
No, I see him as having negative value to the Canadiens in the sense that contract is extremely problematic. The Ducks might look at it as not that big of a problem, but they could definitely see that the Canadiens view it as a problem. Say, so if you want to get rid of that contract, then you're gonna have to compensate us for it in some way. So I don't know if they were to say, we'll take Mailloux, Anderson, and the Jets' first-round pick, and we'll give you Zegras. Mm-hmm. Does that strike you as fair? Because I think the Canadiens would do that. Is that fair from the Ducks side? Are the Ducks getting enough for Trevor Zegras in a deal like that? Because let's be clear, the Jets pick, the way they finished the regular season, I think they had the fourth best record in the season, the fourth best overall record. So really, that pick is going to be no better than, say, 26th or 27th overall. Would that be enough for the Ducks to part with Zegras? I'm sure it would be. I'm sure they'd be very happy with that deal. very happy. Well, you got to consider what other deals are coming in. I mean, that's the thing. But Mayu's value, I don't want to discount Mayu's value. Listen, when you're a rookie, you get named to the All-Star team, you get named to the All-Rookie team. Like, he had an excellent rookie season in the AHL, and so
Yeah.
that has value, and he has a definite tool package that would be very, like, I mean, we talked about how Verbeek likes physical guys. Like, that's what you're getting with Mayu. So I think the Canadiens would do that. To me, it's the whole Anderson component of it. And, it's right now, yes, I see him as having negative value just because he's coming off such a horrendous season. But there are ways to look at Josh Anderson and believe that that's a one-off. But again, sort of as mentioned earlier with Laine, for different reasons, obviously, that could be the perfect circumstances to say that this player needs a fresh start somewhere else. Let's give him that opportunity, and maybe we'll come out the big winner and have a contract that we got compensated for taking and doesn't actually wind up being that bad. Remember, this is the same general manager that gave Alex Killorn his contract. So he might not see Josh Anderson's contract as being all that onerous, but he would probably get something for taking it.
Wow. You know what? It's tough. I don't know which one of the two I'd be more comfortable parting with between Mailloux and Reinbacher, because Mailloux will never be as good defensively as Reinbacher is, but the offensive upside and the meanness in the game makes for a very, very attractive combination. And I don't know. I understand the balance in Reinbacher's game, the maturity. There are tons of elements that make him very, very attractive. I guess pretty much in the same way that, back in the day, Trevor Timmins thought that Caden Guhle was a blue chip prospect, probably for some kind of the same similar reasons. I
think they're very similar players. That's absolutely they're extremely similar. Yeah, I think there's probably more offense in Reinbacher's game than we've seen from Goalie, but it's it's untapped and it's unknown. That is the big question in both of their games, and was the big question going into the draft years.
I think, there's personally, if I had to choose between the two, I would probably go with trading Reinbacher rather than that other package. Even if you're willing,
you're shedding the Anderson contract. Oh wow, I would not.
You know what?
I would just no. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. If you get to add Zegras, shed Anderson, and basically all you're giving up is the Jets first and Mailloux for Zegras, and plus you don't have Anderson anymore. That's enticing.
Yeah, but I know, but you're selling Josh Anderson at his lowest value ever. I believe that this guy can be turned around and be at least valuable in some capacity next year, and not regarded as somebody you want to just throw in the rubbish because you have no use for this guy.
At his best, what is he getting you? At his best, at $5.5 million, which isn't a huge number, but he's a 20 to 25 goal scorer at his best, and not.
Yeah,
I have trouble.
He's fast and hits like a freight train. I mean, the Canadiens traded Domi, who had a 72-point season for this guy, and for the first 2 years of the deal, we thought that they won that deal.
Oh, I still think they won. I still think they won that deal. There's no way they lost that deal.
No, they did win it, but I mean, that there's a guy he's a middle six guy, but the sum of all of his parts makes him. He's not the hockey IQ god in any capacity, but the sum of all his parts makes him a rare commodity.
You're getting Trevor Zegras
to turn around.
You're getting Trevor Zegras is coming back the other way. Of course, it's not 1 for 1. The best player in the deal is Trevor Zegras. Can we agree on that? The best player in that deal, it's not close, is Trevor Zegras. And so
that's not what I'm debating. What I'm saying is that what if you wait one more year to try to reset Josh Anderson, plus Mailloux, plus that late first, all of that I think might end up being worth more than Reinbacher. That's all I'm saying. I'm not disputing the fact that Zegras is the best player in the deal. Of course he is.
Well, yeah, but I would say Reinbacher is the second best player. Reinbacher, I don't know about that. I mean, Josh Anderson's ability to revive his career in Montreal at this point, yes, it's likely. To what extent it's likely, I don't know. Meaning like, how high will that go?
You talk about giving up a late first round pick as a sweetener to get rid of his contract.
Yeah,
I mean, man, that's the lowest value you could ever move him. So that's why I'm saying yes, of course, Verbeek.
Why would you not jump on it to get Trevor Zegras? I don't understand. How you can see that. That's a win-win. You're giving up Mailloux for sure, which is, he could flourish and become a mainstay on their defense for years, which is the point. That's why the Ducks would even be interested to begin with. And then this guy is...
Maybe I see Mailloux bigger than you do. That's all it is,
Absolutely not. You don't. I see Mailloux as being a very important piece of the deal. Like, I see it as Mailloux being the primary piece, Anderson being a wild card chip for the Ducks where they can maybe get what they're looking for, a right shot forward that can resurrect his career there, but with a contract that the Canadians don't necessarily like. That's what the first round pick is for. Say, here, take this contract off our hands, and you're sending us back this blue chip forward who is the best player in the deal. And so there's some risk. But of course, there's going to be risk, and of course, you have to give. I'm not discounting what Mailloux is going to become at all. I think Reinbacher's ceiling is higher. I think the things that Reinbacher knows about the game already at the age of 19 are things that are difficult to teach, difficult to learn at this level. I don't think they're things that Mailloux will probably ever learn. Yes, he has other qualities, the booming shot, physicality, the meanness, everything you mentioned. I agree with 100%. But I think the rare package is Reinbacher, which is why they used the pick they used on him and why they enraged a portion of their fan base as a result. But it's, I don't know. I'm also kind of thinking of it from the point of view of what would this management team do? Yeah. And this management team stuck their neck outs for this kid. And are they really? Yes. Are they really going to? I mean, they did for Mailloux too. Listen, they didn't draft him, but they signed him to an entry-level contract. They gave him his NHL debut. They have endorsed him after all the crap that happened that resulted from him being drafted to begin with. This administration has brought him into the NHL. So they have definitely given him their endorsements. They've invested a lot in him as well. But for the Canadians to stick their neck out to get Reinbacher and really take a bold risk with that pick, and then a year later trade him away, I just think it would be difficult. And if the Ducks said it's him or no one, then that's why I think maybe that deal doesn't get done. Not because Reinbacher should be untradeable. I wonder if this administration would be willing to do that so soon after trading him, and just as he's about to arrive in North America.
Yeah, no, this all makes sense. But I think that the proposed package with Mailloux, Anderson, and that late first round pick I'm sure would get it done. To me, this is the sort of deal that I don't know if there's a whole lot more that the Ducks could get by shopping him around on a team that would be able to fit his salary, have a need for that player, and would be willing to give up that much. It's a competitive offer. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know which of the two the Canadians would lean for. But I mean, in both cases, Reinbacher's better be good, and Zegras better be good too. Yeah. Nobody doubts the skill level of that guy. I mean, the hands are amazing. He's a very skilled player. So if the Canadians are looking for skill, he's your guy.
They are. They're looking for offensive
So,
talent. Kent Hughes said it about 6 times just last week. So I mean,
yeah,
he fits what they're looking for. That package fits both things that Pat Verbeek said they're looking for. If he considers Josh Anderson to be a player that they can that just needs a change of scenery and whatever. But yeah, it seems like a win-win. Perhaps we'll see.
yeah,
So last case here is another kind of different type of trade, and this involves Martin Necas in Carolina. Now it's similar. It's similar in the sense that it's similar to what we were talking about with Lindell and Holloway, in the sense that Carolina's got some cap things, some roster management things that they're going to need to take care of this summer. I think their acquisition of Jake Gensel is something that they would not like to see be a rental. They would like to see that turn into more of a longer term partnership. And I think what's going to happen in the playoffs here might determine to some extent how Gensel feels about that. But that's going to add some money to their cap. Tuva Teravainen is a UFA. Who knows if they would want to extend that relationship. But the real issue is Seth Jarvis is an RFA. Obviously, Necas is an RFA with arb rights. Brady Shea is a UFA. Brett Pesce is a UFA. And next year, Slavin, Orlov, and Burns are all UFAs. So this is a team that – and Chatfield's a UFA this year. So this is a team
Martin Necas was a good support player.
Martin Necas, who's a good support player and is a big culture guy, and I think is very appreciated there, is also UFA. Exactly. Yeah. So they have a lot of irons in the they have a lot of things to deal with this offseason. Necas is just one of them. He's coming off a 2-year bridge deal at $3 million a year, so he's not going to sign the same kind of contract as Newhook did or Dach did. He's already signed his bridge, so he's probably looking for kind of a longer term, bigger deal. He took a bit of a step back production wise this year. It wasn't his best season, but I think the tools are all there. The potential to get back to, last season he had 71 points in 82 games. This year was 53 in 77 games. Still scored 24 goals, 29 assists. Like he's a good player. But circumstances in Carolina might make it so he's available. What do you think? What do you think of that possibility? Because I think with all the D that we just mentioned, like cheap young defensemen for this team would probably be pretty valuable.
Yeah. I think there's no doubt that he's going to be available. I think that there's almost an expectation that he's going to be playing for another team next year. I heard somewhere that he had expressed a desire to have another chance somewhere else. Maybe that he sees that he would have a better fit somewhere else. He's been used strictly on the wing, even though he used to be a centerman. He's never been like a kingpin on draw, so maybe that's a drawback for him. His calling card is really that season last year with 71 points in 82 games. Is he? My question is, who's the real Martin Necas? So is he the one that we saw last year, or is he a guy that is condemned or is condemning you to constantly wanting more out of him? He's got a great physique, blazing speed, capacity to manipulate the puck, in tight very well. Doesn't shoot nearly enough though. Protects the puck well, but is not physical. I think he would be a very, very good second line player for the Canadiens. And there's a potential, I think, because of the cap restraints that the Hurricanes have, that the Canadiens might not have to give as much for him that they would for Zegras.
Oh, for sure. That's 100%. There's no might. That's for sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the flip side of it is that if we see that Necas can be made available by the Hurricanes, there's going to be a lot of teams calling. So the issue here is but there's more of an impetus for the Hurricanes to trade Necas than for the Ducks to trade Zegras. They can easily just say, you know what, we keep Zegras and we keep going.
Yeah.
They could choose to do that.
Yeah.
Necas, there's something's got to give somewhere. So they're going to receive a lot of calls. So at some point, it's not just about, are we making a fair offer, or are we giving something that the Hurricanes will be happy with? Mm-hmm. It's also that you have to beat every other offer that might come the Hurricanes' way. So, but I think that there's an opportunity there for the Canadiens to provide quantity instead of quality to the Hurricanes, especially on defense. And so if they can manage to keep both Reinbacher and Mailloux and go get a top six forward, I would rather have Necas than Zegras for that reason.
Right.
You know? So, and also what's interesting too is that there's a similarity to a certain extent in the way that the Hurricanes play and the way that the Canadiens want to play. Mm-hmm. But the Canadiens are probably, it's not as defined and it's not as clear-cut black and white, and that the system the Hurricanes have put in place. So you would bring in a guy who's familiar with what's asked of him, but you would still have the possibility of giving a little bit more room to maneuver and probably find a comfort zone where he would be able to express himself. So, so overall, he seems to me, and he's got, I mean, he's in line for a much bigger payday, probably north of $5 million, I would guess.
Probably, yeah. And plus, you'd have to make a pretty significant term commitment, probably, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, at 25 years old, you're still, I'm okay with giving commitment to a 25 to 32 years old. It's good. It's still very good years. You don't pay for bad years, generally speaking, unless, but it's just, I think this is a situation where you really want your pro scouts to have done their homework in understanding what's the character of that guy, how committed he is, and why is it that on a team that's nearing Stanley Cup contending status, he seems like he's going to be the odd man out. Does he want it? And do you think that if you bring him on your team, you're going to give him the opportunity to be more than what he's already shown?
Right.
So, because there's been a lack of consistency to a certain extent, and you want to be able to extract the best out of him night after night, and that's where it becomes a good deal for the Canadiens, especially if you go long term with a player like that.
Yeah. So one thing I would note is his on ice expected goal totals are higher than his actual goal totals. So that's one area where maybe there's some value to be extracted. He's not a particularly great defensive player. And obviously you're dealing with Carolina, who's one of the more analytically inclined teams in the league. So
he sticks out as worse than the rest of the team.
Oh, absolutely. Relative to the team, his defensive numbers are quite poor. So, maybe some red flags there. At 25, you can't bank on too much growth. Yes, he might not be a finished product, but he's pretty close at that age in all likelihood. Other than maybe the bump he would get from a different system or different coach or what have you. But yeah, I think to me, he looks like, pretty, it just makes sense to me that the Canadiens would go after a guy like that, combined with the Carolina needs going forward. I agree with you that in an ideal world, they get to keep both Reinbacher and Mailloux and add a player like this. But I think what you mentioned in terms of the competition from teams around the league and what they would be offering, like the Canadiens have, I don't know the extent to which the quantity over quality thing is going to work here because of that competition around the league for this player. If you're taking in offers from 10, 12, 15 teams, generally you're looking at that offer and you're looking at the best player in the offer and be like, okay, well, here's step one. Who's offering us the best player? And so if the Canadiens start being like, well, we're going to give you 3 okay young defensemen who could become good but aren't yet, that might not get them past that first stage of evaluation. I'm not saying teams do it that way, but I mean, if you're looking for, if you're trying to evaluate the trade offers based on what the best player is that's being offered to you, then maybe the Canadiens would have to throw in, a Reinbacher or a Mailloux. I don't think they would throw in either, but it's I don't think Justin Barron is necessarily going to get it done. That's especially since he's under contract. So but whatever they can, they have to make that call. They have to be in on that. That's to me, sure. He really fits what they need. Is just a solid top six guy, fits sort of the age window that the Canadiens have right now. He's, a year older than Nick Suzuki, or not even, I don't know what his birthday is, but he's not far in age from Nick Suzuki, who's going to be 25.
Yeah.
He's going to be
He's 25. He turned 25 in January.
That's it. So Nick turns 25 in this fall, in August, I think. It's, if I'm not mistaken. When's his birthday? Nick turns 25 in August. Yeah, August 10th. So, kind of fits that way. But yeah, I think those two guys, Zegras and Necas, are completely different deals and completely different circumstances, as you spelled out. But to me, more than the Dach Newhook-like deals that we went over earlier, strike me as sort of the biggest sort of potential for the Canadiens to add that offensive talent that Ken Hughes repeatedly stated he would like to add.
Yeah, so I think overall what this exercise shows is that I think that the Canadiens, in terms of what they're looking for and where they're at in their build, they're past the Newhook and Dach trades, and that they might be looking for bigger fish.
Yeah.
And very quickly, if we go back to strictly, the secondary type of players, two names that I want to bring in quickly. First is Capo Caco, who's in RFAs, finishes his contracts. He's playing 12 minutes in the playoffs. Of course, Jeff Gorton knows him very well, and so does Nick Bobroff. They drafted him second overall, but he comes off a season of 19 points at 61 games. How much longer are they going to wait that he blossoms like Alexis Lafrenière has? I'm sorry, but Artemi Panarin only has two wings, only has one wing to play with, because he takes one of those wings, and Lafrenière is benefiting from the other. But I think that there's a chance of a fresh start, and if the past animosity with the current administration in New York can be overcome, that could be, I think, an interesting gamble there. So yeah, that guy.
I think he's convinced. Well, listen, I'm sure the Canadiens would like to. I don't know the extent to which that whole animosity is real, but for sure, I don't know if the Rangers can get enough in a trade for Kakko that would outweigh the benefit of giving him maybe 2 more years on a cheap bridge and see if he does actually blossom. Like it's you were talking earlier about Anderson and trading him at his lowest value. I mean, that's basically what the Rangers would be doing with Kakko, right? They are in a championship window right now. So There is a benefit if you bring in something that helps that. I don't know if the Canadiens can really offer that team something that helps that. That's kind of my one reservation is like, what are they, unless they're just giving them away, which I don't think they would do. Again, if you're just giving them away for futures or sort of B-level prospects or whatever, I would just bridge him if I were the Rangers and see if 2 more years.
Well, he's already been bridged once. He's at $2.1 million and he's arbitration eligible.
Yeah, well, what's he going to get in arbitration? He's not going arbitration, so I don't think that's a factor. So it's
doesn't have the arguments.
Yeah. So anyhow, I don't know. I mean, sure. It could be worth the risk, but I mean, we're 2024. He was drafted in 2019. He's had time, and it's just not working out. So I don't know. I don't know what the extent, but I don't think he would be he wouldn't be a very high priority for me if I were running the Canadiens.
And very quickly, another guy that I've noted is Jonathan Berggren with Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy who's had all sorts of trouble finding a spot in Detroit. He's fallen out of favor.
He's a huge guy.
Huge what?
He's just a big guy. Is he not?
Jonathan Berggren?
Oh, no,
he's not. He's 5'11".
I'm mixing him up with Rasmussen. Sorry.
Yeah, or Soderblom too.
Yeah,
who's
exactly.
even bigger than Rasmussen.
Yeah.
No, Berggren is. It looked not so long ago that he was on his way to becoming a player, but this year he only played 12 games in Detroit. To me, this is the sort of guy, not to fill the second line role, but you add talent on the cheap, and if it works out, it's a bonus for you at the NHL level. Otherwise, you have in Laval a guy who's not wearing diapers and who can drive your offense at 23, 24 years old. So it's a secondary type of acquisition. Doesn't solve your problem today, but I think that it could be a sneaky gamble since Detroit seems to be slowly moving away from that guy. So that's it.
Okay.
All right. Hey, can we play our jingle quickly?
Which jingle? Oh, the Future Friday jingle?
Yeah.
Okay, let's play the Future Friday jingle. Future Friday. So, we're playing that because we're probably not going to hear it for a while. So so we are kind of going into off-season mode. A lot of our podcasts are actually going to be all of them are going to be geared towards the future. But we're gonna go down to one episode a week as of now. So we're going to have that episode on Mondays. So we're kind of dropping the Friday episode, which is why we're paying homage to Greg McPherson's Future Friday jingle that he made for us. So we'll still take mailbag questions for Monday. We'll have episodes probably similar to this one where we're just kind of spitballing what the Canadiens offseason could look like. We'll have some draft episodes coming up for sure as we dig deeper into the draft. But yeah, this is the last week where we have 2 episodes. We're going to go to 1 episode a week starting next week. And then maybe as we get closer to the draft, we'll ramp it up a little bit again. But for now, should mention actually, it's almost an hour and a half into the show, but the draft lottery was set.
Okay.
Draft lottery was set for May 7th.
Yeah.
So that was announced today. So obviously the Canadiens have an 8.5% chance of winning that lottery. And another, I think it's 8.6% to pick second. But anyhow, that's coming up. And so we will have a lot of draft content coming out on the podcast eventually once Marc-Antoine and I, or actually, I should say mainly me. Marc-Antoine stays on top of this stuff more than I do, but as soon as I have more time to dig into the prospects and start to get to know them a little bit, we will bring you some of that. So thanks for listening all season. Obviously, we're not done, but this is our last Friday episode for a while. And so, so thanks for everyone. We've looked at all the comments. I've loved watching the numbers. There's so many of you. Just today, while we were having lunch together, someone came up and said how they love our podcast, and so we love the feedback. But we'll be back on Monday, of course. I will be there every Monday through the off season.
Yay! All right, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.